Welcome to the Parenting Then and Now podcast, the show that remembers the good and sometimes the not so good old days of parenting past. I'm your host, Samantha Kemp-Jackson from the Multiple Mayhem Mama blog, and every week we'll be talking about how things were then and how they are now, parenting through the lens of the ages, if you will. Now, whether you're a parent, a kid, or someone who used to be a kid, you'll want to stay tuned as we reminisce about the past, embrace the future, and marvel in the present how things have changed. If you're ready to glance back in time at kids, parenting, and the good old days, you're in the right place. So sit back, relax, and let's take a trip down parenting's memory lane. I hope you enjoyed this episode. When did parenting get so complicated? I find myself asking this question often as I trundle my kids off to school every day, following a silent prayer that I've offered to the universe, hoping for the best. After all, there are so many things to worry about now. Apparently, there's the nutritional content of your child's lunch. It had better be within the suggested guidelines. There are indoor shoes, of course, not to be confused with outdoor shoes because, germs. There's the insistence on providing stainless steel water bottles, the expensive kind, BPA free, of course, to your child. And if she loses it, which she probably will, you'd better replace it. Pronto! And let's not even get into the edict that says that you must provide a litterless lunch with absolutely no refuse, and that all items must be returned home with your child. Soggy, slimy, banana peel, and all. It's tiring being a parent these days. Who can remember all of these new rules and regulations? I know that I can't. And I know that longing for the days when you could send your kid off to school with an old-fashioned lunch that was simple, yes, but sufficient, at least by our parents' standards back in the day, is something that I do often. Rebecca Cuneo Keenan is a mother of three, a writer, a blogger, and a very funny and astute observer of how parenting has changed, sometimes for the better and more often than not for the worse. Because rules, I sat down with Rebecca to get her take on all of these topics and then some. This was a really fun and insightful interview. Have a listen. So welcome to the Parenting Then and Now podcast, Rebecca.
Thanks, Sam. I'm so excited to be here.
Thanks for being here. And full disclosure, we're friends, right?
We are. We have regular lunches.
We have regular
occasional
lunches.
drinks.
Yes, sometimes. And we have bonded over our mutual love and disdain of how things have become in some ways about parenting, right?
Yes. I think we like to laugh instead of taking it on as all these stressful obligations. Sometimes it's nice to hold it up as ridiculous and just have a good chuckle.
And it often is. So, Rebecca, for our listeners, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how many kids you have and when you grew up and where, as just kind of a background?
Sure. So I'm Rebecca Cuneo Keenan, and I'm a freelance writer as well as I blog at playgroundconfidential.com. I have three kids, a boy who's 11 and two girls who are 9 and 6. And I grew up in Toronto, and I grew up probably like a 20-minute walk from where I'm raising my kids now. So I can really kind of hold up the then and now comparison and make those kind of insights. Yeah.
That's so awesome. And I know that you have a really interesting story in terms of when you were a child. So you grew up in I guess it would be the early 80s or late 70s?
I was born in 78. Mm-hmm. So it was mostly the 80s was my kind of childhood, I would say. By the 90s, I was getting into, teenagehood and stuff. And that's a whole other story.
Right. And so now you grew up in Toronto, but you lived. I know you have a really interesting
Right.
story you had told me one time, and I just think it's so interesting that you lived outside of Toronto for a while, and that was an interesting experience for you and your family. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So I grew up in Toronto, and both my parents were born in Toronto. My grandparents were born in Toronto, and like crazy Toronto-centric family. And then my dad got his PhD when I was 9, and he got a 1-year position in Halifax. So that was much smaller than Toronto, and I was kind of like the big city like, girl at
Big
that
city
point.
girl,
I had the
yeah.
street smarts, and then after that position, that year ended, he wound up taking a job at Fordham University, which is in the Bronx, New York.
Cool.
And he moved the entire family down to the Bronx, and we lived right in the Bronx on Crotona Avenue, which is the university is just outside of Belmont, which is the North Bronx, Little Italy. So we're not talking the terror of the South Bronx and what you picture of that. But it was the 90s, and there was a crack epidemic, and there was like drugs, and there were guns, and you know, I'm very white, very pale, very blonde. I remember my dad took my brother and I to a roller skating rink in the Bronx, and we were the only white kids there. And I didn't really notice until my dad had mentioned it later, you know, but like, and then you kind of notice, you kind of, you know, don't worry about it. But it was a kind of, I think, a really interesting experience. But we lived there for a year, and then wound up coming back to Toronto because my parents owned a house, which they could not sell because the market had crashed at that point. And then my dad wound up commuting back and forth from New York to Toronto for 20 years or something like that. Yeah.
Wow. Now, your experience going from Toronto to the Bronx must have been really quite impressive on your young spirit, because the fact that you didn't notice that there was this, difference, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes, with you and everyone else who was at the roller skating rink, probably was born of the fact that you're from Toronto and we're a very diverse city. But also it's a reflection of the way that your parents raised you, not to really kind of look at.
Yeah, I mean, I felt different all the time, regardless of race, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
But it is true. And I did grow up like off Jane Street in a very diverse part of the city. And so it wasn't that kind of a culture shock, although there is, you know, you don't see that kind of great racial divide in Toronto in the same way as you see it in a lot of American cities.
Right.
So that is eye-opening, like, and you know, there's lessons to be learned from that, I guess.
Yeah, no, very interesting. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, Rebecca, is because we know each other and you're my friend, full disclosure, but also because I think you're really funny and you have some very, very succinct insights on what we both agree to be some of the craziness that has come into what we call parenting now. Now, as you know, I grew up in the 1970s in Toronto, and the way that I grew up, and I talk about this a lot in this show and in other media outlets, is that things were pretty freeform, and I'm fine. I grew up okay, and my parents were great parents, and they took care of us. And yes, my parents left me alone at home while they went out, or I was alone during the summer, and I was a latchkey kid when I came home from school, and that was perfectly fine. Now we've got a little bit of a kind of bubble wrap helicopter parenting thing going on in society, and this is kind of part of the reason why I started this podcast, because I'm still trying to grapple with how we got here, why we're so afraid of everything, and whether or not we can ever get back to a place where we trust our kids. Now, I know with you, you think that there's a lot of kind of craziness going on, and you've kind of recounted a lot of that in your writing and in our discussions. And so let's just dive right in, okay? Because there are so many things to unpack here. I know one of the things that, and I grapple with this as well, is the way that we school and educate our kids. So the rules, the regulations, the things we have to follow as parents for our kids. So when we were kids, we would just drink out of the water fountain. And yeah, if there were old lead pipes, fine, no big deal, right? Now you gotta, for example, bring a water bottle to school. You had a very interesting story about water bottles that made me laugh and spit my coffee out through my nose when I read it, I think you posted it on Facebook.
Yeah.
Tell
us about the water bottle story.
Well, over the summer, I just realized that I have 3 kids and they each have water bottles and they're children, so they lose them. So like basically keeping track of the water bottle felt like it was taking up 50% of my time and energy. I mean, not to mention like the cost, of buying these water bottles that are not cheap if you want to get the ones that are BPA free.
Oh, yes, the BPA, which I didn't even know what it was until a few years ago, but okay. Yeah.
And the stress. And then so I posted about this on my community page on Facebook. And the response was hilarious because people were really upset about, yes, these water bottles are taking over our lives. Some people have talk about spending like hundreds of dollars because you keep losing these $20 water bottles. And then you wonder, how is this better for the environment, really?
Well, exactly. The irony, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the water bottle thing. So again, that comes down to this whole kind of thing where everything has to be perfect. So your kid can't drink from,
a juice box.
Now, we don't have that with my kids in the school, but so have they outlawed juice boxes?
No, they have not at my school outlawed them, but it's not the norm to send them the way it was. Like, I think I had a juice box every single day. I had a juice box and a peanut butter sandwich and an apple. That's what I had for lunch.
So did I.
Every day for 12, 15 years. I don't know. Yeah.
I didn't realize that juice boxes were now verboten. I'm a bit confused by that because maybe I shouldn't say this. I send my boys to school with juice Tetra Packs every day.
Every day. Yeah. I do it every once in a while in the summer to camp. I like to freeze them because then it's an ice pack and then they get a nice cold drink.
Yeah.
But I know, especially with little kids, juice has become bad, right? Juice was, our parents thought juice was good for us, so we drank it because it has vitamins. It's like fruit.
Yes.
And then it became bad because it's all sugary. And it's probably neither great nor evil,
Right. So now has the whole thing with the water bottles, has that proliferated because there's this overarching idea in schools, or at least in your kids' school, that drinking juice is bad? So they've encouraged parents to bring water bottles?
I think it's that, and I think it's also the litterless lunch idea.
Okay.
So you want something reusable. You don't want the juice box. They bring home every single wrapper.
Right.
They don't.
So you have to throw it out in your recycling.
The apple cores and the banana peels come back slimy, and
and the lunch bag smells. Yeah.
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 I mean, on the other hand, I used to just sometimes throw out my lunch altogether, and my parents thought I ate it. So at least I know if they're eating.
That's true.
Another thing for me to worry about.
Yeah. No, that's so interesting. So there's that whole thing with the water bottle, and I guess that's indicative of, I guess in their defense, they want to have less, I guess, recycling, and they want you to kind of be more green. But do you feel that is also a reflection, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but do you feel that it's a reflection of almost like a nanny state of schools telling parents what they should, what they shouldn't do, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable? Some people have said that, and I'm curious about what your perspective on that is.
I certainly have seen that, particularly with younger kids and lunches, and lunches being policed and notes being sent home about kids not having enough nutrition.
Please expand on that, because I know where you're going with this.
There was that story. Now, when was that? I wanted to say it was a year ago, could have been 2, where there was a big it went viral, this teacher who had said that this lunch wasn't good enough to send. Right. And I know even my daughter in grade 1, the day after Halloween, I said, guys, if you want to take a couple candies to have as a snack, it's November 1st.
Yeah, that's what we used to do back in the day. Yeah. It's like you would show your best candies on November 1st. You'd say, hey, look at this. Right?
And Mary came home and said, I'm not allowed to bring candy to school.
Oh.
The other older kids, they kind of don't, they give up at a certain point. But with the little kids, the kindergartens, the grade 1s, maybe even 2s, there are some teachers with the best interest in their heart, I am sure. But it's so hard. Like, food is such a personal family choice. We all have good days and bad days. We have the days where there's the homemade stew in the thermos, and we have the days when you're like, oh my goodness.
Where there's a cheese bun, which we will talk about in a second, right? Yes. But I think you're right about food being a very, very personal choice. I actually feel really strongly about this because there is absolutely no way that any school or parent is going to tell me what I can and can't put in my kids' lunch within reason. Obviously, I understand the peanut thing. There has been a proliferation
let's say
of peanut allergies and certain allergens. But I do recall there was a case here in Canada, and I know that there's a lot of listeners in the United States, but here in Canada, there was a case a couple of years ago, and I'll try to find it and put it in the show notes, whereby there was a mother who was suing one of the local school boards because she wanted dairy-free, egg-free, nut-free, and gluten-free schools. So as far as I'm concerned,
all of the schools,
the whole
across
school,
the board.
because her child is extremely allergic. And I say to this mom, I completely understand how difficult it must be to live with having to police your kids' food so much because they're deathly ill. But that's an extreme case. And if you cut out all of those things, I don't know what I would send my kid to school with. Like, if there's no dairy, there's no eggs, there's no nuts, there's no, I think wheat was another one. It was basically all of the food groups.
Yes.
So I thought, okay, this is a bit atypical. And where do we stop? Like, where do we say, okay, nuts, that's pretty.
What's reasonable to accommodate and what's not, really?
And so I'm grappling with that, but that's another whole issue. I don't want to go on a tangent, but I did allude to a cheese bun, and So in the whole, discussion about nanny states, but also about lunches, what's appropriate, stress being a parent, putting lunches together. Tell us about your cheese bun story.
Well, over the summer, my fridge broke. Just completely stopped. So no freezer, no fridge. It's great. Yeah. I have 3 kids. We're going to day camp. I needed to pack them lunches that they could keep cold or at least fresh, or at least keep the food poisoning bacteria at bay.
Which is strange because we used to bring ham sandwiches or whatever that would sit in our lunches for hours in the hot sun and we were fine. But anyway, keep going.
And so, like, I had a new fridge that was supposed to be ordered, and the mix-up came up, and so it was like another half a week before I could get my fridge in. So I went online and I said, I need ideas for kind of pantry-stable foods I can pack my kids that they can take to summer camp.
Yeah.
And there were a bunch of good ideas, and then somebody said pizza buns.
Oh.
Pizza buns, which I'd seen kind of in the bakery section at the supermarket and never really tried. And so I went to Metro, and they're $2 a pop, and it's just a bun that's got a little bit of tomato sauce and some cheddar cheese on it. Just white bread.
To me.
And I went, yeah, like this is going to keep. And the kids love them. And now they're a weekly staple.
Sounds
fridge
awesome.
or no fridge. Yeah.
So now, did you get any kind of pushback on that?
At camp?
Yeah.
Camp is a different thing. When the kids go to summer camp, I know that the teenage counselors at the camp do not care. It's all just, I kind of just indulge in all the giant Costco boxes of pre-packaged stuff because they're active all day too. So I know they need energy. But at school, there is definitely a greater pressure to send something nutritious, especially in the younger grades where there's rules of even like Mary can have first snack has to be a fruit or vegetable.
No.
I think so. And then if she has a granola bar or something, that's second snack. It has to be healthy at least.
This is really regimented. Could you have ever imagined when you were growing up, Mary's age, your daughter, that a teacher or a school board would have told your parents, hey, you can't have a cookie or you can't have... I mean, we always had... I can always remember kids at school who had the big full-on lunches that were homemade, and then we had kids who had a bag of chips and a pop, and it's like nobody said boo to them because at the end of the day, it's the parents, right?
There were parents who used to come and like bring McDonald's every day at lunch to kids because, hey, I understand. You can't always be packing it in the morning.
No. And so what are your feelings, Rebecca, about this general overall policing of our kids? Or maybe I shouldn't use the word policing because I'm injecting my own personal point of view. But how do you feel in relation to how you grew up and how you went to school and how things were probably fairly freeform both here in Toronto and also in the Bronx? How do you feel? Do you feel that it's a good thing for our culture, our society? And if so, why? And if not, why?
I mean, first of all, I think we need to maybe set some boundaries, right? Like maybe what's the purview of the school and what's the purview of the family?
Right.
And now when the cases, what's a problem when a kid is sent with no lunch repeatedly?
Of course.
That's when we need to worry about how can we get some food for this kid, and that's what you worry about. You don't worry about the kids who are their parents are packing them food.
Yeah.
And they're bringing, and you don't know what the kid's eating for breakfast. You don't know what the kid's eating for dinner. Sometimes parents go, okay, this is stuff that's shelf stable and that I can pack quickly and I know my child will eat, so they at least eat something. Because I've packed nutritious lunches that have come back untouched, right? So
Right.
I sympathize, and that's money thrown away, really. Totally. A lot of people, it's very privileged position to be able to say that we should be presenting our kids with an assortment of whole foods at every meal. And if they don't eat it, that's okay. Keep presenting it to them because maybe one day they will eat it. That's basically what I do, and I am lucky that I can afford to deal with some of that food waste, or then I eat it myself, which I don't need to.
Yeah.
But for a lot of families, that's it's just not a choice that's on the table, to be prepared, to have the time, energy, and money and resources to preparing food that your kid might not eat and then will go to waste.
Yeah.
And then what are they going to eat? It's
Right.
very difficult. So that's really, I think, not the business of the schools.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think that's a really important point in terms of the economy of it, because at the end of the day, the bottom line is, what if the parents have a very limited resource pool of money, and they've just determined that, okay, this is what I'm going to give, Johnny and Jane this week for lunch. And if Johnny and Jane don't eat it, or if the school says, nope, this is not acceptable, you have to buy X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
How is that?
And and you're putting a lot on the little kids to tell a 5-year-old what your mother gave you. You're not allowed to eat because it's not
an interesting
good enough.
Point. I never even thought of that, because that's a whole kind of psychological, emotional thing that you actually are putting on the child. Because then the child, it's confusing because you're giving them the subtextual message that your mother or father or guardian is not good enough, or is not giving you a good enough meal, which has deeper implications, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does. And in general, don't you think that the parents are expected to provide so much more? Can we talk about indoor shoes, Sam?
Oh, yes. Let's talk about indoor shoes, because this is the bane of my existence right now, along with snowsuits and snow pants and all kinds of things. But yes, let's segue into indoor shoes right now. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Okay. So when you were a child, Sam, how many pairs of running shoes did you own at any given time?
I owned one until they had holes in them.
Yes.
And then my parents would buy me a new pair, at which time I would get holes in those maybe a few months later, and then I get a new pair. I did not have a myriad of shoes of which to choose from to wear. My parents were middle class. They were working. We couldn't afford to have, my parents had 3 kids too. And one pair of running shoes for a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old or a 5-year-old is perfectly fine, and you replace it. Now, please go into what you wanted to say about indoor shoes.
Right. So, I have a similar... I had a similar experience in the childhood, At some point after the hole, at some point the shoe will get replaced, but not before. And kids need running shoes. I think they're the best shoes for them to run around and play outside until the snow comes. And they need them in school for gym and, for running around. So I try to get my kids one good pair of running shoes per year. Mm-hmm. And then when it starts to get cold or snowy, you leave your shoes at school and you wear your boots back and forth. That's
as we did.
As we did. I have memories of taking off my boots at school, and the sock comes off with it, and then you pull it back on, and then not having any shoes for some reason. Some days I had no shoes.
Yeah, and you walked around your socks.
And our socks.
Okay.
And right in the puddles, and your feet were wet all day. It was fine.
Right. You got a cold and you learned your lesson.
Yeah.
Move on. So now, what is this indoor shoe thing that's happening?
So now, most schools, I don't know what, it seems like maybe my oldest is in grade 6. So maybe grade 4, 5, or 6, they kind of stop worrying about it so much. But certainly with the younger grades, there's this this fear. I think I link it to germophobia, to tell you the truth, that we can't have shoes that have been outside in the classroom because they will make the classroom dirty. And I've heard all the arguments that, they track in germs and bacteria, they track in dirt, and we don't have the funding for janitorial staff anymore. But I mean, surely there's caretakers still at the school.
Right.
Remember we would wipe when it's wet.
Shoes off. They had a mat.
Yeah.
You wipe it and you keep walking.
When you go to work, you just wear your shoes inside the building, right?
Exactly. Yeah, no, this became a thing too for me and my kids. And it baffled me because I did get a couple of notes that were sent home saying, please make sure that your children have indoor shoes. And it was a little bit, condescending, I must say, and a bit, shoe shaming. Can I make up that phrase? I was shoe shamed. Hashtag shoe shame. I think I will hashtag that. I was shoe shamed for my kids not having indoor shoes. And then again, not dissimilar to what you're saying about the child feeling bad about the parents, my kids would come home and say, Mommy, you didn't send shoes. I don't have indoor shoes. So then all of a sudden it becomes this mad scramble. There's guilt. The parent feels guilt. The kid feels bad because they don't have their indoor shoes. And then invariably, and this has happened a few times, especially with my youngest, my twins, the 8-year-olds, I've had to run out at the last minute. Oh, okay, let's go out to Walmart. I got to buy a pair of shoes. And it's ridiculous.
And that's where I've fallen down to, is where I think it's so unnecessary, and I think it's such a massive expense for a lot of families, and I really don't understand why we're forcing this. Just let the kids wear their shoes in and out when it's dry and when it's mild.
Dry and when it's... Well, and this is the thing too, and the rationale doesn't fly with me either, because if you take that rationale to the logical conclusion about the shoes bringing in germs, then ergo you will have to do that with the coats and the hats.
They roll around on the ground. Let's be real.
My kids literally, exactly. My boys, they come home, they're filthy because they've literally been rolling in dirt and mud. So if you're going to use that rationale, then you should use the rationale to its logical conclusion. So all their clothes need to be changed when you go in. So it's either all or nothing. So it seems a bit arbitrary, doesn't it?
It totally seems arbitrary. And you know what's so funny is this year, so the older two kids, I was like, you guys don't need indoor shoes, right? And they're like, no, we'll be okay. I'm like, okay. I'm like, but I know the little one, I'm going to have to get her. So I had the one good pair of running shoes, and then I went to Walmart. I did.
Thank you, Walmart.
Thank you, Walmart. If you're looking for sponsorships.
Oh, yeah, maybe I better go to that.
And I bought a cheap pair of runners that were like sneakers. They weren't really like she had good quality ones. And then she had these other ones. But the ones that were supposed to be outdoor and the ones that were supposed to be indoor, she just kept getting them mixed up and bringing different ones home. So they were all just going in and out, in and out.
And again, there's that thing again. You're expecting the child and or the parents to monitor, okay, are these indoor? Are they outdoor? Are they, like I have identical twins, and oftentimes what I do is I buy them I don't dress them the same, but I buy them the exact same shoes, because sometimes one will be out or they'll lose one or whatever. So it's like if they have the exact same shoes, out of 4, I can get 2 that become...
I love that.
Right? So that makes it even more complicated to figure out, okay, are these the outdoor ones or the indoor ones? And invariably they're all outdoor shoes. So this is a big joke as far as I'm concerned.
It is. And it's funny, except it's expensive. It's a big
very expensive
joke, right?
Yeah, and the joke's on us because we're buying this stuff. So we got to change this. And on that note, I think what we're going to do is we're going to just take a little break, and we'll be back, and we're going to talk about some other interesting things related to parenting. Thanks, Rebecca. So welcome back. We're back. We're talking to Rebecca Cuneo Keenan, and we're talking about all kinds of things related to parenting then and now, and let's just say the nanny state. So Rebecca, we were talking about food before the break, and you have a thing about clean eating. What's your thought on that?
Well, insofar as clean eating kind of encompasses an entirely broad set of rules that's based on pseudoscience that I think has very little bearing in actual nutritional evidence-based science. People have these phobias of different things. It could be gluten, it could be dairy, it could be obviously sugar, it can be all kinds of things. And so it stems from, I think, a general there's a general like truthiness, as Colbert used to say, like about like we should eat less processed food, we should eat more whole food, right? But then it becomes people pursue it with like such fervor, right? Almost like a moral fervor, right? Like there's this purity that's involved with this term, clean eating. And I really, that I don't really care what individuals do. We all have individual needs. And certainly some people really can't have gluten and some people have allergies and some people are just trying lose some weight one way or the other. What the hell? Let me give this a try. I've done it. I've tried a fad diet because I was like desperate to take off some baby weight.
Right.
But I do not. My issue is with the people who are cashing in on this fear and perpetrating this kind of like pseudoscience that I think it's the same kind of basic idea that we saw with the anti-vaccine. So where you get this people. It's because people are actually more aware and they're more interested in their health. So they want to do their own individual research. So they go online and they dig up all kinds of things. And there are people who are happy to, and I'm not saying they don't even believe what they're preaching, but they're happy to put forth these theories that are based on very flimsy evidence, if any.
Yes.
And as much as we want to be critical individual thinkers, we're not individually all well trained or able to sift through and find out what the good science is and what is not, right?
Right.
And I worry about sometimes the effect that those kind of nutritional rules can have on our kids. I know a lot of people who their kids don't drink milk at all, for example. And
is milk bad, Rebecca?
It
wasn't when I was a kid because we all had milk. But
I go through 8 liters of milk a week in my house.
Okay, so it's not in your house.
And let me say, there are people who are lactose intolerant, who are dairy allergies, who does not sit well with. Obviously, those people should not have milk. There are people who are ethically opposed. There are vegans. That's fine. I'm not saying those people should, there are other ways of getting the nutrients that you find in milk, but it's much more difficult.
Right.
And it's much more expensive. It's much more time consuming. So for the average family to think somehow, let me go spend money on rice milk or almond milk because I heard that that's better for you. Those other kinds of alternate milks are actually, as far as I know, and I'm not an expert, I'm not a nutritionist, I just read a lot. As far as I know, they really have like minimal nutrients compared to cow's milk, which is actually full of protein and vitamins. And I've had dietitians tell me that they consider it almost like a food, right? So it's like if you're putting together a healthy dinner and a glass of milk and your kid eats half their dinner or they don't have their green beans or they don't, I have 3 kids. I can't track what everybody's eating in any given day. I put the food out there. They drink their milk. And you know what? They're getting what they need.
Some protein. You feel they got some protein. And that's funny because...
And calcium.
Calcium.
It's a really good source of calcium.
Because milk was a staple when we were kids. I know that when I was like in the 1970s and 80s, and milk was a staple. That was, what you gave kids. Now, granted, the flip side to that was I didn't hear a lot about lactose intolerances and allergies and such. I'm sure they were there, but they weren't as well known.
Yeah.
So we are a little bit more aware of why some people can't have milk. But do you feel this whole kind of backlash against milk and what were some of the standards of our youth is part of this kind of overarching, I don't know what, helicopter parenting, nanny state? And is it translating back to what we were talking about at school? Like, is this whole clean eating, you can't have milk, whatever, is that part of the school thing too?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know that it has anything to do with the schools per se. I think there's a general concern for health and nutrition as being primary and utmost, right? And almost surpassing things like, spending time with your children and exercise and whatever. I mean, I don't know, but it seems like it's we're worrying a lot more about food, and in doing so, I wonder if we're just passing down anxieties about food to our kids.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So, in other words, that could manifest itself in a number of things, not only the psychological anxiety, but perhaps physically, maybe eating disorders.
Down the line.
So
people think that there's also these claims that food has triggered all kinds of other physical ailments.
Really?
Where there is very little. People have a rash, so they try to cut out all these elimination diets that are designed to try to deal with eczema or to deal with all kinds, a gamut of illnesses.
Yeah.
You go to a naturopath, they say, oh, you don't need to go see a doctor. What you just need to do is you need to cut out dairy and you need to cut out nightshades.
Oh, boy. Yes, actually, I've heard that about nightshades. I didn't even know what nightshades were until a few years ago.
Again, that was a generalization. I'm sure they're very good naturopaths. Yeah.
Nightshades. But yeah, no, okay. I get it. Yeah. Interesting. So I know that there's been a lot of very, very fervent discussions on your Facebook page, Playground Confidential, and I would ask everybody to check it out. It's great. It's quite interesting. It's a closed group, right? Can you tell me
Yes.
about
So
that?
my blog is playgroundconfidential.com, which you can look up and you can read my content. You can follow me on Twitter, I'm Rebecca Keenan. On Instagram, I'm Playground Confidential. On Facebook, I have a Facebook page that's open and accessible, Playground Confidential. But if you look under groups, there's a closed group that's the Playground Confidential community. And if you put in a request to join that group, then especially if there's a place to leave a message and you tell me you heard about it on this podcast, I'll approve your request. And then that's where there's a really strong community of parents who feel it's like a safe space to ask honest questions and get some feedback and advice. And the members there are really, it's a pretty good vibe, I think.
I think it's a great group. I mean, I actually go there and it's funny, it's infuriating, it's interesting, it's timely, it's topical, and it's actually the reason why I thought I'd love to have you on the show. So I really want to thank you for coming on. But before we go, there's one last topic that I do want to talk about real quick. That was a subject of Playground Confidential on the Facebook group, and that's birthday parties. There was a very lively discussion about birthday parties. Do you want to tell us about that?
A member had asked whether or not she should force her daughter to go to a birthday party. The girl does not want to be friends with this girl, but the mothers are friends.
Yes.
And the other girl doesn't have many friends and was only inviting 2 other girls. So it would be nice if her daughter accepted the invitation and went, but her daughter didn't want to. And should she force her to or not? And this is the kind of question where there's not a black and white answer. And there was a real divide and really interesting discussion about, explaining the roles of being polite and being kind. And sometimes we do things that we don't want to do because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And also other people saying, you know what, I don't want to go to parties of people I don't like, who don't treat me well. Like you shouldn't force your child to do that. This is her decision, right? And besides, like, just because you're friends with her mom, like, there's no reason to expect that a friendship would form with the girls. And I often weigh in, but I did not weigh in on that because I don't know what the answer is, Sam.
Well, it's funny because I remember when I was a kid, you just invited whoever you wanted to a party and you did what you wanted to do. And there was less protocol. And I think this is kind of what I try to kind of cover in this podcast is this it's a lot more rigid now, I think. I think that things were a little bit more kind of loosey-goosey, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And we just invited whoever we wanted to go play. We invited people to a party. I
remember going to a party in the summer, and it was literally garbage bags taped together on the lawn with the sprinkler. So it's like that homemade.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Slip aside. And the parents were like sitting around a plastic table drinking beer and smoking cigarettes. And the
Which
kids
would
were
never happen now.
sliding on the garbage bags.
Sounds like a good time to me.
It's a great party.
Well, yeah, but again, you would never have parents smoking cigarettes around kids, which, people did it. My parents, people did it. Okay, I know we don't do it now. We know that smoking's not good for you and stuff. But again, it's this protocol, right? The thing with the birthday parties, it's like, okay, what is the right thing to do? And why can't we just determine what we feel the right thing is? Because I think deep down, we all know, you know what? This is the right course of action with this particular situation. This is not the right course of action with this particular situation. But I think that we're so unsure and insecure about what we're doing because we've been made to feel that way. And I think that this is part of the problem in our society right now. I think we need to kind of maybe get back to a time where we trust our gut a little bit more. What do you think?
I think you're right. It's like things go through this filter of this is what I want, but how is this going to reflect on me? How is this going to play out? And
at
we get
school
these,
and on social media.
Social media,
right?
we get that instant feedback all the time.
People will post about you. Can you believe Rebecca did invite my kid to this party? And they'll post it on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Maybe it's that fear of shaming. I mean, shaming can go a lot further now, right?
It really can. Yeah. I mean, and sometimes, in this case, it is a tricky call, but yeah, sometimes go with your gut is really the answer, isn't it?
I think that's the absolute answer. And I think that's a great way of ending this episode. Thank you so much for being here, Rebecca. It was so lovely having you on the show, giving your insights.
It was so much fun. Thank you, Sam.
A few laughs. You're very welcome. Go to playgroundconfidential.com and check out Rebecca's group, Playground Confidential, on Facebook. Well, it's a mad, mad, mad world out there. It's an upside-down world, too. From my discussion with Rebecca, it's become clear that school rules for our kids are something completely different from just a generation ago. Education in an age of helicopter parenting is an interesting combination. No easygoing, let kids be kids stuff here. Nope, there are edits that must be followed, or else. Now, is this really the way to go? I don't know. Rules are important, but come on. Sometimes it's okay to not be so rigid about what should or shouldn't be done, especially when it comes to our kids. After all, we want to teach them the ability to be able to figure out the things in life that are truly important and the things in life that are not, because let's face it, isn't that what our parenting role is all about? Until next time, folks.